I saw her before I heard her. The morning was quiet, and that way it gets right after first light, when the frost still holds the grass down and even the birds sound careful. I was walking the lower fence line with a mug of coffee in my hand, thinking about nothing except how my gait had been sticking again. That's when the brush on the far side of the ravine moved, slow, heavy, like something was pushing through on purpose. A dark shape stepped out near the old boundary marker, right where my property meets Grant Harper's place. A mother bear. Not a cartoon bear. Not some cute thing you see on a phone. She was big and real and wrong to be standing that close to houses. Her coat was wet in spots like she'd been in the creek, and her head kept turning as if she was listening for something behind her. She took 3 steps, stopped, and lifted her nose. I froze. My coffee went cold in my hand. The boundary marker was a sun-bleached post sunk into the ground years ago. Grant and I had argued over it so many times the soil around it looked stomped. A foot this way, a foot that way. Every inch mattered to him. It mattered to me too, if I'm being honest. We'd had surveyors out, deputies out, even a mediator from town once. Nothing stuck. We could be polite for a month, then a downed tree would land across the line or a fence staple would mysteriously pop loose, and we'd be right back to it. But seeing that bear standing right there made all of that feel stupid and small. I backed up a step, careful not to snap a twig. My phone was in my pocket. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't even know who I was calling first. Wildlife office? Sheriff? Grant? Out here, the official advice is always the same. Keep your distance, secure your trash, don't make the animal feel cornered. None of it tells you what to do when the animal is already at your boundary post, like she's claiming it as her own. Then my dog started barking. I didn't bring him down with me. He was on the porch, but he had that sharp, angry bark that carries. The bear's head snapped toward my house. Her ears went forward. She didn't run. She just stared, locked in. I whispered, "Buddy, stop," even though he couldn't hear me. The bear took one slow step in my direction, not charging, testing, like she was deciding how much space she owned. I raised my hands without thinking, palms out, and stepped back again. My mind raced through every rule I'd ever heard. Don't run, don't scream, make yourself big, don't make eye contact. No, do make eye contact. Play dead, don't play dead. None of it felt clear when she was 30 yards away. A screen door slammed. Grant's voice shot across the ravine. "Mason, what are you doing down there?" Of course he'd see me. Of course he'd assume I was messing with the line again. I hissed, "Grant, get inside." He didn't process it. He was already halfway down his own slope, angry, arms swinging like he was headed to a fistfight. Grant is the kind of man who believes volume fixes problems. He stopped when he saw the bear. For a second, neither of us moved. The bear stood between our properties like she'd been placed there on purpose. Grant muttered, "No way." I kept my voice low. "Back up, slow." Grant took a step forward instead. He pointed past the bear, straight at the boundary post. "That's my line. She's on my side." I stared at him. "Are you hearing yourself?" He shot me a look like I'd insulted him. "You always have to make it your side." The bear's head turned toward Grant's voice. Her body stiffened. She lowered her head just a little, a warning posture that made my stomach drop. Grant didn't notice, or he did and refused to admit it. He took another step, and gravel slid under his boot. The bear huffed, one hard burst of air, loud, close enough that I felt it in my chest. "Grant," I said, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. "Stop moving." He finally stopped. His eyes went wide, and he held his hands halfway up like he didn't know what to do with them. The anger on his face didn't disappear, but it cracked. From behind the bear, deeper in the brush, I heard a faint sound. Not a growl, not a deer, a thin, squeaky noise, like something small calling out. The bear's ears flicked. She glanced back over her shoulder, then looked at us again, and I understood it in the simplest way possible. She wasn't just here. She was guarding something. Grant swallowed. I saw it, his throat working. "Cubs?" he whispered. "Maybe," I said. "So we need to be smart." Grant's jaw tightened like he hated that I was right. I tried to keep my body turned sideways, not squared up. I took a slow step back. "Let's go up. We call someone. We clear the area." Grant's eyes darted to the post again, like his brain couldn't let it go. If she's denning on my side. Grant, I cut in. There is no your side right now. He flinched at that. And then his own dog barked from his yard. Deeper, louder than mine, and closer to the slope. The bear snapped her head toward the sound. The air changed. Her shoulders rose. She rocked forward, weight shifting to her front legs. Grant's hands went up higher. "Tank, shut up!" he yelled toward his house. The bear took 2 steps forward, fast this time. I felt the old, stupid instinct to run hit me like a punch. My legs wanted to bolt. My brain screamed to move. But if Grant ran, the bear would go after him, and if I ran, she'd go after me, and if either of our dogs rushed down, it would turn into a disaster in seconds. I said, loud enough for him to hear but not loud enough to challenge her, "Grant, do exactly what I do, back, up." He nodded once, tight like it cost him something. We moved together, 1 step back, then another, keeping our eyes on the bear's chest, not her face. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might make noise. The bear kept coming until she was near the boundary post, close enough that I could see the wet shine on her nose. She stopped. She stood broadside, blocking the ravine like a wall. Grant's voice came out shaky. "Mason, she's not leaving." "No," I said. "She's telling us to." Then the wind shifted, carrying the smell of her damp fur, mud, and something sharp like crushed berries. She snapped her jaws once, a hard clap that echoed off the trees. And then, without warning, she closed the distance again. 3 quick strides that put her uncomfortably close, close enough for me to hear her breathing and see the scars on her muzzle. Grant sucked in a breath. I felt him tense beside me. The bear huffed again, louder, and stomped her front paw into the frosted grass, cracking it like thin ice. Right then, a tiny squeal came from behind her, and the bear swung her head back, then forward, eyes locked on us. We were way too close, and she knew it. Grant whispered, "If we move wrong, she'll come." I didn't answer. The bear leaned forward, just a fraction, and everything in me said the next second would decide what happened to both of us. We didn't turn our backs on her. We backed away until the slope leveled out, slow and stiff, like our joints had rusted in place. The bear stayed by the boundary post, broad and solid, watching us until we were far enough up that the dogs, barking, faded into the house walls. Only then did she turn and melt back into the brush, quiet as if she'd never been there. Grant and I stood there longer than we needed to. Neither of us said thank you. Neither of us apologized, we just breathed. That was yesterday. This morning, I was back at the same spot, minus the coffee and with a knot in my stomach. The frost had burned off, leaving the ground soft and dark. I crouched near the post and studied the dirt the way the wildlife officers on television always do. Grant showed up a minute later, hands jammed in his jacket pockets. Grant said he'd called the county wildlife line last night. I asked what they told him. Grant said they told him the same thing everyone tells you: secure attractants, keep distance, do not escalate. I snorted before I could stop myself. Hard to de-escalate a 300-pound animal with teeth. Grant shot me a look. You always think you're the expert. And just like that, the old tone crept back in. We'd been neighbors for over a decade, but that word never felt right. We shared a line, not a life. The trouble started with trees. My trees, his trees. Trees that fell half on one side and half on the other after a storm. Then came the fence. Then the creek access. Then accusations about equipment tracks and cut firewood. Grant accused me of inching my fence over. I accused him of moving markers. We both called deputies. We both filed complaints. We both lost money on surveyors who shrugged and said the line was complicated. There was a court date once, a small room, folding chairs, a judge who looked tired before either of us spoke. Nothing came of it except paperwork and more bitterness. Standing there now, with the dirt still fresh from yesterday's encounter, it felt absurd that we'd ever raised our voices over this ground. Grant kicked at the soil near the post. She came back at dusk, he said. My head snapped up. You saw her? Grant nodded. Same spot, same direction. She didn't cross, just stood. That matched what I'd seen at dawn. Flattened grass, a dark smear of mud on the rocks near the ravine, patterns. She's moving on a loop, I said. Grant frowned. Like patrol? Like she's checking something. We fell quiet. The woods were louder now, birds fully awake, wind pushing through the higher branches. The normal sounds made yesterday feel unreal, like a shared hallucination. Grant said he hadn't slept. I admitted I hadn't either. Later that afternoon, I heard her again. Not close. Deeper in the trees, a heavy crack of brush, then silence. I texted Grant without thinking. "She's back." He replied a minute later. "I know." That evening, the smell hit first. Not rot, not trash, something sour and warm, like animal bedding left too long. I followed it down toward the ravine, careful this time, stopping every few steps. Grant was already there, standing on his side, staring at the same patch of ground. Grant asked what I thought it was. I said I thought we were standing near where she'd been spending time. We scanned the ground together, our eyes finally doing the same work instead of competing. That's when I saw the tracks. Small, clumsy, pressed deep in the mud. I pointed them out. "Those aren't hers." Grant crouched despite himself. "Too small." "Too many," I added. We followed them a few feet into the brush, then stopped. The earth was torn up, leaves pushed aside, the ground worn smooth like something had been circling. Grant's voice dropped. "Den." "Or a temporary bed," I said. We didn't go any farther, we didn't need to, the signs were clear enough. Grant stood up slowly. "So that's why she's here." "That's why she's not leaving," I said. He rubbed his face with both hands, frustration leaking out in a tired sigh. This had to happen right here. I looked at the boundary post between us, crooked and ancient and suddenly irrelevant. It didn't pick sides. Grant didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of its usual edge. "My granddad put that marker in," he said. "Told me never to let anyone move it." I hadn't known that. I said my father had taught me the same thing. Grant nodded once. "Figures." From deeper in the brush came that same thin sound we'd heard yesterday. Short. Fragile. Grant froze. "You hear that?" "I do." The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable snap of something large moving fast. Grant straightened. "She's close." "And protective," I said. We backed away together without talking, eyes on the trees, steps measured. Neither of us argued about whose side we were on. Behind us, in the soft mud near the ravine, the cub tracks crisscrossed the ground, fresh, undeniable, and right between our two properties. The cub sounds stopped overnight. I noticed it before anything else. No thin squeals, no rustling that didn't belong to birds, just the regular forest noise stretched tight, like something was missing from it. By mid-morning, Grant was already at the ravine when I came down. He didn't look at me at first. He was staring into the brush, jaw set. Grant said he hadn't heard them since late evening. I said I hadn't either. That was bad. Mother bears don't get quieter when their cubs are safe. They get quieter when something's wrong. We walked the edge without crossing it, each of us careful not to step into the worn patch where the tracks had been. The ground looked disturbed in a different way now. Leaves scattered farther out, a snapped sapling bent low, its fibers still wet. Grant said he thought someone had come through during the night. I asked who. Grant shrugged. "Hunters, kids, anyone who doesn't know better." That idea sat heavy between us. The bear showed up just before noon. She didn't announce herself this time. She burst out of the trees on Grant's side, fast and loud, snapping brush like it was dry straw. She crossed toward the boundary without stopping, head low, mouth open just enough to show teeth. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't a warning posture. Grant was closer to her than I was. He froze, one foot half lifted, like his body couldn't decide what to do next. His hand went to his pocket out of reflex. I saw it. "Grant, don't," I said sharp. He pulled out his phone, not a weapon, but the movement was enough. The bear lunged a step, huffing hard, saliva flashing white at the edge of her mouth. Grant stumbled back, boots sliding on loose dirt. He windmilled once, arms flailing, and for 1/6 second I thought he was going to fall straight down toward her. I moved before I thought. I stepped sideways and clapped my hands once, loud and hard, not at her face but off to the side, trying to pull her focus without challenging her. "Hey!" I shouted, steady and deep. "Hey!" The bear snapped her head toward me. Her eyes were black and locked, full of nothing but decision. Grant hit the ground on his backside, scrambling backward with his heels, breathing fast. The bear took another step. I raised my arms, bigger now, heart slamming so hard it blurred my vision. "Easy," I said, even though I knew she didn't understand words. "Easy." She stopped. Not because I told her to, because something behind her made a sound. It wasn't a cub. It was movement. Heavy, human. From deeper in the trees came the crash of someone running away, branches tearing, footsteps panicked and fast. The bear spun, rage sharp and sudden. She charged into the brush after the sound, vanishing as quickly as she'd appeared. The forest went dead silent. Grant and I stayed where we were, listening to the chaos fade into distance. When it was over, all that remained was our breathing and the smell of crushed leaves. Grant pushed himself upright, hands shaking. Grant said he thought he was dead. I didn't argue. We didn't see the cubs that day. We did see what had scared them. Later, after the adrenaline burned off enough for us to think straight, we found boot prints near the ravine, fresh, careless, cutting straight through the undergrowth. Grant cursed under his breath. I said nothing. I just stared at the ground, imagining someone stumbling onto a den and panicking. Grant asked what we should do. That was new. I said we needed to keep people out, rope, signs, calls to wildlife officers again. Grant nodded without arguing. The bear came back at dusk. She paced the boundary in long, agitated loops, huffing, snapping at shadows. She crossed the line twice, not caring whose land was whose anymore. Grant and I stood together near the houses, making ourselves visible but distant, moving only when she moved, retreating when she pushed forward. At one point, she charged again, not full speed, but close enough that the ground shook. Grant stepped forward without thinking. I grabbed his jacket and pulled him back. He didn't fight me. We retreated in sync, slow and deliberate, until she stopped and turned away, her silhouette heavy against the darkening trees. Grant let out a long breath. Grant said, "We can't keep doing this alone." I agreed. We stood there as night settled in, both of us staring at the same stretch of forest, understanding without saying it that whatever came next, we'd already crossed a line together, and there was no going back. Night came fast. Too fast for either of us to feel ready. Grant and I stood on opposite sides of the driveway at first, phones pressed to our ears, repeating the same information to two different dispatchers, wildlife officers, rangers, anyone who might listen. They listened. They just couldn't come. Grant said the nearest unit was tied up 3 counties over. I said they told me the same thing. We both heard the part they didn't say out loud. "You're on your own for now." The forest felt different after dark, sounds carried farther. Every snapped twig felt closer than it was. We shut the dogs inside and killed the outside lights, leaving only the glow from the house windows. Bright light can push a stressed animal. Darkness, at least, stays neutral. Sometime after midnight, the bear returned. I didn't see her at first. I heard her breathing, deep, rough pulls of air that rolled out of the trees like fog. Grant was closer this time. I saw his porch light flick on by accident, then snap off again. Grant cursed under his breath. The bear huffed, irritated, and moved closer. I stepped onto my porch and raised one hand, palm out, letting her see me without stepping toward her. Grant did the same on his side, mirroring me without being told. She paced the ravine, back and forth, nails clicking on stone. Every few steps she stopped and listened toward the deeper forest. Grant said he thought the cubs were still out there. I said I hoped so. The bear let out a low sound then, not a growl, not a roar, something strained and raw. It went on like that for hours, short movements. Long pauses. Neither of us slept. When one of us shifted, the other stayed still. When she advanced, we retreated. When she stopped, we froze. Just before dawn, she disappeared again. The next morning felt unreal, like we'd crossed into a different version of the same place. Grant looked wrecked. I probably did too. We walked the boundary together in daylight, careful, methodical. We tied bright tape between trees to block the informal trail that cut through the ravine. Grant brought out old rope from his shed. I nailed a piece of scrap plywood near the path and scrawled a warning with a marker. Grant said it wouldn't stop everyone. I said it might stop one. That afternoon, the wind shifted and carried a smell we hadn't noticed before. Musky, sharp, close. Grant stopped walking. I did too. The cubs appeared without warning. Two of them, small and clumsy, tumbled out from behind a fallen log on Grant's side, whining softly. They moved like they'd just learned how legs worked. Grant froze. I whispered for him not to move. They were closer than either of us wanted. Too close to houses. Too exposed. And then the mother exploded out of the trees. She put herself between us and the cubs in a heartbeat, charging straight to the boundary line and stopping there, broad and massive, head low, teeth bared. Grant sucked in air. I felt the ground vibrate under my boots. She roared. Not loud for distance, but loud for warning. A sound that pressed into my chest and told every part of my body exactly where I stood in the order of things. Grant lifted his hands higher than I'd ever seen them. I said back, not to her but to Grant. He obeyed. So did I. We retreated together, slow and open, eyes on her shoulders. She advanced until she was sure we were moving away, then stopped and swung her head back toward the cubs. One cub stumbled and fell. The mother turned instantly, nudging it upright with her muzzle. That was the moment. Not fear. Clarity. She wasn't here to fight us. She was here to move them. Grant's voice came out rough. She's pushing them uphill. I nodded, away from the ravine. We held our ground far back, not interfering, not leaving either. The bear herded the cubs slowly, deliberately, never turning her back on us until they were deep enough in the trees to feel safe. Then she stopped at the boundary one last time. She looked at us. Not like an animal sizing up prey. Like a mother checking whether the threat was gone. After a long second, she turned and followed her cubs into the forest. Grant let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in him for days. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Whatever line we'd argued over for years had vanished the moment she stepped between us and her young. Morning came quiet, almost apologetic. The forest looked the same as it always had, but it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted, and Grant and I both knew it the moment we stepped outside. We didn't meet at the ravine right away. We handled the small things first. Trash locked down. Feed bins sealed. Doors checked twice. The kind of work you do without talking, because talking would only get in the way. Around mid-morning, Grant walked over to my side without asking. Grant said he'd moved his truck. I asked why. Grant said he didn't want the engine noise near the trees. I nodded. That made sense. We stood together near the boundary, not crossing it, just watching. The bright tape we'd tied the day before fluttered uselessly in the breeze. It felt flimsy now, like a gesture rather than a solution. Grant said the wildlife office called back. I asked when help was coming. Grant shook his head. Not today. There was no anger in his voice, just fact. The bear didn't appear all morning. By early afternoon, the air warmed enough that the smell of damp earth rose from the ravine. Birds hopped back into the open. Life edged closer again. Grant broke the silence. If she comes back, we don't push her. I said I knew. He hesitated, then added, we don't split up either. That was new too. Late in the day, we heard movement uphill. Slow, purposeful. The cubs came first. They stepped into view one at a time, cautious now, sniffing the air, staying close together. They were dirt-streaked and smaller than I'd expected, ribs just barely hidden under fur. Grant inhaled sharply. I kept my eyes on the tree line. The mother followed. She didn't rush this time. She walked out in full view, head high, eyes tracking us both. She stopped well short of the boundary and stood there, judging distance. Grant shifted his weight. I touched his sleeve without looking at him. "Still," I said. He stayed still. The bear sniffed again, then turned sideways, placing herself between us and the cubs out of habit more than threat. The cubs bumped into her legs, impatient. Grant whispered that they looked tired. I agreed. We did the only thing left to do. We stepped back. Not fast, not dramatic. One step at a time, giving space without retreating all the way to the houses. Enough room for her to choose the forest without feeling chased. The bear watched our feet. When we stopped, she advanced a few yards, then stopped too. It felt like a negotiation neither side had words for. Grant took another step back. So did I. The cubs followed their mother as she turned uphill, away from the ravine toward thicker cover. She paused once, glancing back, checking the distance again. We didn't move. She made a low sound, softer than anything we'd heard from her before, and nudged the cubs forward. They disappeared into the trees. The bear lingered a moment longer, standing broadside, the late sun catching the scars along her flank. Then she turned and followed them, her shape dissolving into shadow. Grant exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since yesterday. I felt it leave me too. Grant said, "That's it then." I nodded. We didn't celebrate. There was no rush of relief, no laughter, just the understanding that something dangerous had passed because we'd chosen not to make it worse. Grant looked at the boundary post, then away from it. Grant said, "We got lucky." I said, "We didn't push our luck." We stood there until the forest swallowed the last sound of movement. The bear didn't come back. Not that evening, not the next day. But the mark she left, flattened grass, broken twigs, the memory of her standing between us and her cubs, stayed exactly where they were. And so did the silence between Grant and me. This time, it wasn't hostile. It was careful. A few days passed before I realized the quiet wasn't temporary. The forest settled back into itself. Birds returned to the ravine. The wind stopped carrying that sharp, nervous edge. At night, I slept without jolting awake at every sound. Grant stayed on his side. So did I. But the tension that used to live between our places was gone. 3 days later, a branch came down across the dirt road after a hard wind. I went out with the chainsaw before thinking about it. Halfway through the cut, I noticed Grant standing on his porch, watching. Grant walked over without saying anything. He picked up the far end of the branch so it wouldn't bind the blade. I nodded once. He nodded back. That was it. A week after the bear left, I saw fresh tape hanging on the trail marker again. Grant had replaced the faded strip without asking. He'd also added the second sign, handwritten and plain. Wildlife area, keep out. No blame, no names. Later that afternoon, I found my fence line straightened where it dipped near the creek. Grant's work. Quiet. Careful. He hadn't moved the post. I didn't mention it. Instead, I fixed the loose hinge on his old gate that evening, the one he'd been swearing about for years. We passed each other a few times after that. Short words. Neutral tones. Grant asked if I'd heard anything. I said no. He said good. A week later, the wildlife officer finally showed up. She walked the ravine, studied the tracks that were already fading, and confirmed what we knew. Mother and cubs moved on. Grant stood beside me while she talked. Not in front, not behind. That felt important. She told us we'd handled it better than most people do. Neither of us took credit. That evening, Grant crossed the boundary for the first time in years. Not to argue. He stopped near the post and looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know where to put his feet. Grant said he'd been thinking about what his granddad used to say, about land being borrowed, not owned. I listened. I said my father believed something similar. Grant let out a short breath. Guess we were both guarding ghosts. I didn't disagree. We stood there for a moment, the space between us no longer sharp. Grant looked toward the forest. She didn't need us to be enemies. No, I said. She needed space. Grant nodded slowly. So did we. There was no apology. There didn't need to be. The line was still there. The post still crooked, the history still heavy. But when Grant turned to leave, he paused. Grant said, "If anything like that happens again, we talk first." I said, "Yeah." He held my gaze for a second longer than usual, then stepped back to his side. The forest closed in behind him, calm and ordinary. And for the first time since I'd lived there, the silence between our houses felt earned. A month later, the boundary post was still crooked. The creek still curved the same way, and the ravine still collected leaves and shadows just as it always had. Nothing about the land itself had changed. What had changed was quieter and harder to name. It showed up in small, ordinary moments. On a Saturday morning, Grant's truck stood by the road with the hood up. I watched it from my porch longer than I meant to, arguing with myself, then grabbed my tool bag and walked over. Grant looked up, surprised, and said he didn't need help. I told him I wasn't asking. That earned something close to a smile. We worked side by side without talking until the engine turned over, and when it did, he wiped his hands on a rag and nodded like the matter was settled. The big arguments never came back, though the small ones tried. A fence staple popped loose near the creek, and I felt the old suspicion rise before I even reached the spot. Then I saw Grant's footprints in the mud, and the new staple set clean and straight. I stood there longer than necessary, hammer in hand, realizing how quickly my mind still wanted to go to the worst place. A few days later, I noticed a trail camera mounted on a tree near the ravine, angled away from both houses and into the woods. When I texted Grant about it, he replied that it was for safety. I answered that it was a good call. That was the entire exchange, and it felt right. Grant started redoing the warning tape along the informal trail, hanging it higher so hikers would see it sooner. I walked over and helped him without either of us explaining why. We didn't talk about the bear, we didn't need to. When the camera finally caught her, it was exactly how it should have been. Not close. Not near the houses. Just a dark shape moving deep in the trees with two smaller shadows trailing behind. Far enough away to feel like the right kind of distance. Grant knocked on my door that evening, phone in hand, and said he thought I should see it. I watched the clip twice, feeling the same sequence hit me again. Fear first, then relief. Grant said she was still around. I said she was where she belonged. He leaned against the porch rail and stared toward the ravine. Grant said he kept thinking about how fast everything could have gone wrong. I told him I had too. After a moment, he admitted he'd pulled his phone out that day not to film her, but because he didn't know what else to do. I said the same thing was true for me. Grant stood quiet for a long moment, then said that when I clapped and she turned, he'd been angry at first. Then he realized I was trying to pull her attention off him. I told him I wasn't going to watch someone get hurt over a line in the dirt. His shoulders dropped slightly, like something he'd been carrying finally let go. Grant said he'd been acting like that post was the last thing his family left him. I told him it wasn't. When he asked what was, I said it was the way he showed up when it mattered. We stood there as the sun slid behind the trees and the ravine filled with shadow again. A normal evening. A quiet one. Grant finally said he wasn't claiming we were friends. I told him I wasn't asking for that. He nodded and said being decent would be enough. He stepped off my porch and walked back across the boundary without looking at the post. The line was still there, it just wasn't a battlefield anymore.
Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.